Magandang araw. This is our video discussion of module number 19 for BAM 026. Our lesson title, Essential Requisites of Contracts, Consent, Object, and Cost, Part 1. Our lesson objectives are as follows. At the end of this module, you can identify the essential requisites of consent, identify the persons who cannot give consent, and explain the vices of consent. Our productivity tip for today, use the Pomodoro technique in accomplishing this module. Set your timer to 25 minutes, and during this time, make sure to avoid distractions. Then, you may take a break for 5 minutes. Repeat the process until you are done. Happy learning. So let's continue on with our lesson preview. By now, I know that you memorized already the meaning of contract. And now we are going to move on to the essential requisites of contracts. According to Article 1318, there is no contract unless the following requisites concur. First, we have consent of the contracting parties. Second, objects certain, which is the subject matter of the contract. And lastly, cause of the obligation, which is established. You need to know that the essential elements must exist to have a valid contract. If any of the requisites is not present, then we can say that we do not have a valid contract. It could be void, it could be voidable, it could be rescissible or unenforceable, depending on what essential requisites is missing. In this module, prepare to learn about the first in the list of the essential elements, which is consent. Okay, so in this particular module, we will learn about consent. Of course, you need to pause this video for a while and answer the what I know chart. Welcome back. So let's talk about consent. Consent is manifested by the meeting of the offer and the acceptance upon the thing and the costs which are to constitute the contract. Okay? So the offer must be certain and the acceptance absolute. I remember yesterday, I posted a video discussion of module number 18, wherein I discussed with you that offer must be certain and that acceptance must be absolute. Whenever offer and acceptance occurred, then we can say that there is meeting of the minds. And if there is meeting of the minds, then therefore, the contract is perfected or the contract is born. Yan. So, ibig sabihin, kapag yung offer ay certain at ang acceptance ay absolute, nagkakaroon tayo ng tinatawag na meeting of the minds. Kung ang contract, according to 1305, is meeting of the minds between two persons, then therefore, pagka nagkaroon ng meeting of the minds, ay meron na pala tayong tinatawag na contract. So let's talk more about the offer and acceptance. So an offer is a proposal made by one party to another to enter into a contract. The offer must be a definite offer. When a person says, "Will you buy this watch for 5,000?" then this is an offer. I am willing to buy your ring. This is just a showing an interest to buy the ring. But this is not an offer because there is no mentioning about the price. So anong natutunan natin dito? Yung offer, para masabi nating certain, dapat hindi lang siya basta nag-aalok. Kung hindi, meron na ring presyo yung item na inaalok niya. Yun yung pagkakaiba ng will you buy this watch for 5,000? at saka yung I am willing to buy your ring. Okay? So, again, kailangan para masabi natin yung offer ay certain, dapat meron ng presyo doon na binanggit. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, pinag-uusapan ng dalawang malaki ilong na ito. Okay. Acceptance is the manifestation by the offeree of his assent to the terms of the offer. It must be absolute. It can be expressed or implied, meaning the acceptance of the offer can be made orally or in writing, or even if no words were said, but it is obvious in the action and demeanor of the other party that acceptance has been made. Alam nyo, yung acceptance, hindi naman laging kailangang sinasabi. Halimbawa, kapag yung isang bagay na inoffer na, okay, will you buy my watch for 5,000? Hindi umoo, hindi tumango. Pero kinuha niya yung watch, isinuot niya at talagang ginagamit niya. Then we can say that that is an implied acceptance of the offer to buy the watch. Then therefore, even though it is only an implied and no words has been said, masasabi natin that there is a manifestation of assent. Then therefore, there is an acceptance. Okay, so let's continue. A qualified acceptance constitutes a counteroffer. This is a scenario when after offering something and its amount, the other party, instead of absolutely accepting the offer, instead of saying yes, meron pa siyang condition like lowering of price, for instance. So example, will you buy my watch for 5,000? Tapos sinabi niya, yes, I will buy your watch. However, I want, let us reduce the price to 4,500. That is what we call qualified acceptance. Gusto niyang bilhin, kaya lang hindi dun sa presyo na inaalok ng seller. And if that is the case, is there a meeting of the minds? The answer is no. Why? Because according to the law, it must be an absolute acceptance. What happened in this scenario is that there is a qualified acceptance, and qualified acceptance does not constitute meeting of the minds. Okay. So let's talk about here, yung acceptance made by letter or telegram. Sabi rito, it does not bind the offeror except from the time it came to his knowledge. Okay. So example, inalok tapos tinanggap through mail. Ibig sabihin, sumulat yung buyer na tinatanggap na niya yung offer. However, hindi natin yaan masasabi na na-accept na unless yung letter ay nakarating na doon sa seller. Okay, let's continue. Not all people are qualified to give consent. Hindi lahat ng tao po pwedeng magbigay ng consent. Okay. So here, the law provides for the list of persons who are incapable of giving consent. If persons incapable to give consent enter into a contract, the contract is considered as voidable. Again, papaano daw ba kapag nakalusot na yung person ay incapable sana na magbigay ng consent, pero nakapasok into a contract? Ano ang magiging status ng contract? The answer is the contract is voidable. And a voidable contract is valid until annulled by the proper action of the court. So, ano ibig sabihin ng voidable? Ang voidable ay valid contract unless i-annul. Ayan. Okay, so sana matandaan nyo kung anong ibig sabihin ng voidable contract. Ang pinag-uusapan natin dito, persons who cannot give consent. Yung mga tao na hindi pwedeng magbigay ng consent base sa batas, pero nakapasok sa isang kontrata, ano daw ba yung kalagayan o estado ng contract? The answer is that the contract is voidable. At pag sinabi natin na ang kontrata ay voidable, it means that the contract is valid unless annulled. Okay, so let's move on. Sino-sino nga ba tong persons who cannot give consent? According to Article 1327, the following person cannot give consent. Number 1, unemancipated minors, or those persons who have not yet reached the age of majority or 18 years old and are still under parental authority. Ito yung mga menor de edad na nakatira pa sa kanilang mga magulang. Kasi, alam nyo, merong mga menor de edad na kaya ng mamuhay mag-isa o namumuhay ng mag-isa. Ayan. Next, insane or demented person. Ano ba yung insane or demented person? These are the persons whose insanity must exist at the time of the perfection of the contract. The presumption is that a person is considered sane. Alam niyo, yung mga insane at demented persons, ito yung mga masasabi natin na may kakulangan sa pag-iisip. Hindi lang ito basta yung mentally disturbed. Kasi alam nyo, pagka mentally disturbed, it is just a psychological disorder, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the person is insane. Ayan. Okay. So, ang sabi rito, dapat daw yung insanity, it must exist at the time of the perfection of the contract. That is why you need to know the stages of contract. Ano ba ang presumption? Ang presumption, lahat daw tayo ay matitino, ay mga sane. Okay. So next, deaf mutes who do not know how to write. Deaf, bingi, mute, pipe. So pipe at bingi. However, alam nyo kasi, may mga pipi at bingi na nakapag-aral. They are educated, they are intelligent people. Nagkataon lang na meron silang handicap na tinatawag. Kaya nga nilagay dito, dapat yung deaf mute doesn't know how to write for them to be incapable to give consent. So again, hindi basta deaf mute, incapable to give consent na. Kailangan deaf mute who do not know how to write. Okay. So next, effects of contract enter into under the state of drunkenness and the hypnotic spell. Paano daw yung mga kontrata na pinasok ng isang lasing? Paano daw yung mga kontrata na na-hypnotize mo lang yung tao kaya siya napapayag? Ano daw ba ang estado ng mga kontratang ito? Ang sabi dito, the contract entered into under the above mentioned state shall be considered as voidable. So voidable then. State of drunkenness and hypnotic spell, if they are entered into by these people who are under this state, the contract is voidable. And a voidable contract, once again, is considered as valid until annulled by competent court. Next, drunkenness and hypnotic spell impair the capacity of a person to give intelligent consent. Okay, so voidable pala. Next. Pag-usapan natin yung lucid interval. Ano ba yung tinatawag natin na lucid interval? Ang sabi rito, it is the temporary period of sanity. Contract entered into during lucid interval is valid. So if a person entered into a contract during the period that he can give intelligent consent, then the contract is considered as valid, even if right after that period, he reverted back to insanity once again. Okay. So may mga tao kasi na sabihin natin na medyo may problema sa pag-iisip ngayon, tapos kinabukasan matino naman sila, tapos nung time na matino sila, nakapasok sila sa kontrata. Tapos kinabukasan, no, nawala na naman sila sa katinuan. Tapos sa sumunod na araw, okay na naman sila. So anong sabi nito, parang pabalik-balik yung sanity. So ano ba yung lucid interval? Ito yung interval kung saan yung tao ay matino. Yung lucid interval ay yung pagkakataon o yung interval, yan ha, na kung saan yung isang tao ay may kakayanan na magbigay ng intelligent consent. Alam niya yung ginagawa niya ng moment na yon. Ayan. Okay, so let's talk about vices of consent. When we say vices of consent, it means the grounds or instances wherein the contract will be considered as voidable because the consent was not freely given. Okay, vices of consent, grounds or instances wherein the contract is considered voidable Kasi daw yung consent hindi naman talaga ibinigay ng tao sa puso o bukal sa kalooban. Ano-ano ba yon? The following are the vices of consent or the causes that vitiate consent. Number 1, error or mistake. Number 2, violence or force. Number 3, intimidation or threat or duress. And then we have undue influence. And lastly, fraud or deceit. Ayan. Okay, so let's talk about them. Let's discuss this in details. Let's talk about error or mistake. So take note that not all error or mistake vitiates consent. Hindi lahat ng pagkakamali ay masasabi na natin na um, ibig sabihin na the consent was not freely given. Ayan. So to vitiate consent, the error or mistake must be in relation to the false notion or idea or understanding of a thing or a fact which is substantial to the contract. Okay. So, pwedeng ang pagkakamali, kaya pumasok sa contract at naibigay niya yung kanyang consent, ay nagkamali siya ng pag-intindi, pero yung pagkakamali niya sa pagkaintindi, grabe, na talaga naman na masasabi natin na substantial siya sa contract. Example, magbigay tayo ng example. Okay, so, hindi naman lahat ng cellphone ay high-tech, ano? So, halimbawa, pinasok na yung kontrata, ang pagkakaintindi niya ay magagawa o may capability yung cellphone na yon na gawin yung isang bagay. But unfortunately, it was error because of error and mistake na buong akala niya ay ganon, kaya lang naman niya binili yung cellphone ay para magamit niya in that particular use. So therefore, masasabi natin na there is an error or mistake in the part of understanding. No? Okay. So next is violence or force. Yung violence or force, it requires the employment of physical force, which is either serious or irresistible to the point that the party has no choice but to give the consent because of so much fear. Violence or force is present in a scenario where a person signed the contract because every time he refuses, he was being hit on the head. So talagang sinusuntok siya sa ulo, no? So sa takot because of violence and force, no, napilitan siyang pumirma ng kontrata, and that is actually a vice of consent which rendered the contract voidable. Next, intimidation or threat or duress. Ano ba pagkakaiba nito sa violence? Yung intimidation, threat, or duress kasi, wala pang physical harm na nangyayari, unlike sa violence na may physical harm na talaga. Intimidation or threat, nananakot pa lang. Wala pa naman talagang ginagawa na physical harm. However, may presence na ng fear of evil, so therefore the consent is not freely given. So halimbawa, tinatakot siya, napapatayin yung buong pamilya niya, so wala pa namang pinapatay, ni wala pang sinasakal, pero dahil alam mo na capable yung tao na yun na gawin yun, natatakot ka na, so napapirma ka na sa kontrata. And if that's the case, then there is undue influence. Therefore, the contract is voidable. Next, fraud or deceit. Ito ang panloloko. So when do we say that the fraud or deceit is present? There is fraud when through insidious words or machinations of one of the contracting parties, the other is induced to enter into a contract which without them, he would not have agreed to. So, talagang may halong panloloko na pinaniwala ka na ang isang bagay na yon ay talaga naman na napakatibay, napakaayos, na talaga namang original, no? So ikaw naman umuo ka, no? At pumasok ka sa kontrata, nun pala, ayan, mali ka ng akala. Therefore, there is fraud or deceit, and it's one of the vices of consent which renders the contract voidable. Okay. So, in this particular module, your task for today is to memorize and video yourself, okay, reciting the 5 vices of consent together with short explanation. May short explanation, halimbawa, error or mistake, ayan, ano ba yon? Okay? So, violence or force, ano ba yon? Intimidation, threat, or duress, ano ba yon? No? Okay, you can use your own words, okay? And you can explain it using your own words. Okay. So, please post it in the comment section down below. So please also finish this module today kasi matatambakan kayo ng modules. Marami tayong gagawin bago matapos ang third period. So if I were you, if you have time, lahat ng modules nyo ay tapusin nyo na. Nang sa ganon, kapag talagang chinek ko na siya, kumpleto na kayo sa ating Google Drive. So that's all for today. Have a blessed, wonderful day to all of you.